You know what? I kickstarted this channel on the Souls games, but I have not talked about an actual From Software game. Also, I know it's gonna be stupid to make an Elden Ring DLC video, but not make an actual video on the base game, but I don't really care. Elden Ring is one of my favorite games of all time. Is it in my top 5? No. But top 10? Yes. I have fond memories of playing this game in 2022, man. It's those days. But I definitely think this game is one of the better open world games, or the best open world game, in my opinion. I've really only played like one other open world game, that's Skyrim, and as you can tell, I really don't care for open world games. Anyway, yeah, in today's video, I'll be talking about the Elden Ring DLC. Maybe I might go into detail about it. I don't know. So, Elden Ring's DLC, aka Shadow of the Erdtree, was announced in early 2023 in February, and then silence for like a whole year until next February. Then a gameplay trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree dropped, and it looked fudging awesome. And then the DLC released in June 21st, 2024, and it was one of the highest rated games of the year, and was even nominated for Game of the Year for some reason. I understand that the DLC was huge and was basically like a whole video game, but at the end of the day, it was just an expansion for an already great game. Nowadays, people for some reason act like the DLC is bad, and I do not understand where this mentality came from. I'm aware that the honeymoon phase exists, but still, people act like the DLC is empty, or act like the upgrade items are too hard to find. I can kinda understand where some of these complaints come from, but I really don't think the DLC is that empty. If anything, this DLC utilizes its open world better than most games, I'd argue. But hey, that's just me. And the upgrades aren't that hard to find. I see a lot of hoopla about the upgrades being hard to find and how they apparently ruin replay value. But do they really? Sometimes I think people really like to throw that around because the upgrades really aren't that hard to find. And in fact, they're actually pretty easy to find. You don't even need to go out of your way to find these. They're like basically everywhere. And also, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. The Elden Ring DLC is fudging beautiful. Look at these vistas. And also, man, you can literally see the veil in the sky. When Marika veiled the Shadow Realm, she fudging meant it, bro. Also, I think this DLC has a whole different lighting engine because the lighting looks completely different from the base game. So moving on from that, let me talk about the overall experience of the DLC. So basically, it's just Elden Ring 2. And earlier I mentioned upgrades, so there are these things named Revered Spirit Ashes and Shadow Tree Fragments, or is it Shadow Tree Fragments, whatever. These fragments upgrade defense and overall attack damage, including magic. And Revered Spirit Ashes upgrade Spirit Ash defense and attack damage, while also upgrading Torrent's defense. That is all of the gameplay changes. Well, there's a crystal tier that allows you to do Sekiro parries, which is pretty awesome. The DLC also adds a bunch of new weapons and weapon types: hand-to-hand, backhand blades, throwing blades. There's only like one of these, by the way. Great katanas, light great swords, perfume bottles, and this one was a strange addition, but I guess they're pretty cool. And beast claws. That is like 7 brand new weapon types, which is insane for a DLC to add. While there are only a few of these in the categories, it is still impressive. The DLC also adds a ton of new enemies, like these mini boss-esque enemies named Curse Blades, and they can drop a weapon from the new weapon type called Backhand Blades. There's also these annoying fudging bird dudes. I hate great birds, man. Also, I hate these big dudes. I think they're based on these things named Wickermen, if I'm correct. Yeah, these dudes suck, and they two-shot torrent, and there's like one in each area in the game except for Shadow Altus. There's like 4 here for some reason. You can also cheese them with the furnace pot, and also some of these Wickermen require you to actually kill them with the furnace pot. Yeah, speaking of pots, there's a lot of pot lore and pot related items, but the pot lore is yeah, I'll get to that later though. There's new craftable pot items named Hefty Cracked Pots, and you can craft some pretty overpowered pots like Hefty Fire Pot. And also another weird gameplay change in the DLC is locked spirit springs. You gotta destroy the spirit rocks that are blocking them by 1, finding them, or using Morgoth's Shackle. Personally, I just use Morgoth's Shackle for most of them. Okay, moving on from that overview. Now, I want to talk about things that the DLC does better than the base game, at least in my opinion. And the first one is the world itself. So I don't care what anyone says, but I enjoy exploring the Shadowlands more than the Lands Between. While there aren't as many secrets or random dungeons as the base game, the world overall just looks better. Look at how varied the areas are, man. We got Better Limgrave, we got Blue Land, Red Land, Death Mountain, Altus Plateau 2.0, some ancient ruins place. I don't really have a joke for this one. And Scorpion Valley, and then the Abyss. I'll talk about the Abyss a little later, but all of these areas are unique, and I'd argue that they are more interesting than the ones seen in the base game. But hey, that's just my opinion. And also, I like the dungeons in each area too. They're pretty good. Oh, and speaking of dungeons, this DLC adds more dungeons. There are 6 dungeons dungeons in Gravesite Plains, 5 dungeons in Shadow Altus, 2 dungeons in Route Base, 1 dungeon in Chara's Hidden Grave. So altogether, there are like 14 dungeons added in this DLC, which is pretty good. Now, of course, there are far more in the base game. There are like 50 dungeons in the base game, but most of the DLC dungeons are far better in the base game, to be frank. I'm actually a big fan of the Catacomb dungeons in Shadow of the Erdtree. Like, for example, Fogrift Catacombs. It's not all that special, but it has stuff like falling spikes and some other strange, weird traps in here. And also it has this weapon called the Stone Sheath Sword. I remember when this weapon was data mined and I thought it was going to be an ultra great sword, but it ended up being a normal sword. I don't think it looks that good as a normal sword, to be honest. You can also turn it into a Sword of Darkness or Sword of Light, which is a very cool feature. Anyway, Fogrift Catacombs also introduces these new bosses named Death Knights. And if you have a build like mine, which is a guard counter build, you can fudge and destroy these dudes. And each catacombs, except for one, have these dudes. Plus, they got Godwin extensions here. And how did they even get here, man? I thought this land was veiled, but I guess death can bypass the veil. Speaking of death, this dungeon is scary, man. Scorpion River Catacombs is incredibly dangerous, and especially because of these eyeballs, they can move around or be stationary. And they start building up death blight if they look at you, which is kind of terrifying. Personally, I don't hate this dungeon, but it can be really annoying to get through, especially because of these dudes. The wizards, and also the pogo stick imps. I fudging hate these guys. Now, another thing that I like more than the base game is the DLC NPC questlines. I really like all the characters present here, with my favorite being Ansbach. He is the GOAT. I don't really care about Freya that much. She ain't all that interesting, but Teolier, or however you pronounce his stupid name, is hilarious because he's literally Saint Trina's #1 simp, and that is basically his entire character. And then Needle Knight Letta is just a yandere for Mikola, which is very strange. Most of their quests are very simple. Like, Ansbach requires you to just talk to him a bunch, and Teolier requires you to get the black syrup from this guy named Moore. He doesn't really have a quest line, by the way. Well, then you give the syrup to him, and then you have to find Saint Trina, take her nectar, die, and then talk to Teolier again, and then he'll move to her location and then die a bunch of times. That's basically his entire quest line, and I do find this quest line interesting because you get to learn that Saint Trina wants Mikola dead, because he's like, godhood is a prison for that man. And then when you tell Teolier that she told that to you, you'll be like, no, it can't be. She talked to you, but not me. I'm gonna kill you, man. Literally. He's just a simp. His quest is simple, but technically less simple than Ansbach. And Letta's quest line involves invading people. First, you can invade Hornsent, who is this guy who has stinky underwear, apparently. You can either help him or not. I don't usually help him. Why, you may ask?
Because that's why.
And if you choose to assist Letta, she will eventually try and kill Ansbach. I usually help out Ansbach because fudge Letta, and then she will just disappear until the end of the game. And also, I nearly forgot about the GOAT Egon. This guy's probably the funniest NPC in the game. Yelling is literally all he can do, and it's so fudging funny. But yeah, he basically doesn't have a quest line. His quest line is just basically, oh, go kill the dragon, and that's basically it. Now, here is a 2-in-1. Ymir and Yolen. So, this is probably the most involved quest line, because you gotta do a lot of junk. And you can find Ymir and Yolen by going to Shadow Altus, going to these ruins. And when you go down these ruins, you can find Bonnie Village. And this place has some pretty dark lore, and also one of the funniest named areas in the game, the Whipping Hut. This area, despite its hilarious name, is pretty flarkin' messed up, man. The Tooth Whip was used on this all-women race known as the Newman. I'm pretty sure that's what they're called. They call them the Sages, though, but they're called the Newman. The Tooth Whip is fudging disgusting. It's made of rotting teeth or something. And when they whip the women, it makes their bodies easier to fuse together when they're stuffed into a pot, which is fudging disgusting. Remember what I said about the pot lore? Yeah, this is the dark pot lore. And this is why Marka committed genocide against the Hornsent, because she was one of the shaman. Did I say sages? I meant shaman. Dog, what is going on with me right now? And you know what? The Hornsent low low-key deserved it. Anyway, I digress. Actually, I digressed way too hard. But yeah, past Bonnie Village is the Cathedral of Mir, which is just Ermir backwards, or Ymir, whatever. That's just the name rearranged, which is very strange. Anyway, that's where Ymir, whatever, resides. And then you can start his quest. And basically, he makes you go to all these finger ruins, and then you ring the bell there. And the finger ruins also have these weird-looking enemies in this game, aka these weird snake worm men. I hate these guys as well. Also, you can talk to Yolen, and she has nothing really to say. She's kind of mean, actually. Also, you can find her armor in the Bonnie Jail dungeon, which is near Bonnie Village, obviously. Anyway, you gotta ring 2 bells. One is in Cerulean Coast, and one is in the Hinterlands, which is near Commander Geist's boss room. And you have to use this "Oh Mother" emote in front of the statue that was here. I didn't get any footage of it because I'm stupid. But also, I just realized that this questline is kind of similar to Dark Souls 1, where you have to ring those 2 bells. I just realized that now. Anyway, the Hinterlands also has Marika's home village, which is now empty because of what had happened to her people. This area also plays a bit of the main theme, which is interesting. Also, this area has 2 reused bosses, a Falling Star Beast. Why the fudge are you here? And yes, 2 Tree Sentinels. These guys make more sense than the Falling Star Beast, mostly because of Marika, but still, too many reused bosses. So the second finger ruins are huge and fudging empty. I feel like the only valid part of the emptiness complaints are about these finger ruins, because these are the most empty areas in the game. Anyway, after ringing the bell, you can talk to Ymir again, and he will give you another thingamajig. And you can rest at the grace and reset the area, and then you can move Ymir's chair. But first, you can see him in the graveyard, and he starts saying some strange junk, like he's failed to birth someone whole and wants to become a true mother or something. He wants to give birth to fingers or something. What's wrong with you, Miyazaki? Going down the ladder under the chair leads you to the next finger ruin, and you get invaded by Yolen's sister Anna. I'll talk about Yolen again in a second. And then ringing the bell will let you fight the Mother of Fingers, the literal abandoned daughter of the Greater Will. I guess the Greater Will is a deadbeat dad or something. Why does that remind me of a certain character? I hate this boss, but man, this boss is much easier with the build than I'm doing. Because, bro, guard counter builds, especially when you have the DLC weapon, the Black Steel Grey Hammer, is so overpowered, man. Like, I easily beat the Mother of Fingers in 1 try. She was so easy, bro. And also, after beating this boss, you can finish Ymir's quest line by interacting with the chair. And then you will get invaded by Yolen, and defeating her will press the quest line. But Ymir will show up to fight you, and now he's a Mother of Fingers now, so he can give birth to fingers. What's wrong with you, Miyazaki? His boss is similar to Gideon Ofnir in the base game. I don't really care about this boss much, but Ymir definitely has the most content in a quest line. Compared to Yolen, most of her quest line is directly linked to Ymir's, except for the ending. Now you have the choice to give her either a Iris of Oculation or an Iris of Grace. If you use the Iris of Oculation, you just get her weapon. But if you use the Iris of Grace, you will get her Spirit Ash. But there's more. When you go to the Hinterlands, just go down here behind Shaman Village, and you can get into a secret room of a Roboth's Rise and reunite Yolen's Spirit Ash with her sister Spirit Ash. And that's basically the end of her quest line. That's basically all I gotta say about these quest lines. I think they're pretty good in the DLC, and I like them more than the base game. I was gonna talk about the bosses, but first I want to talk about some of the more interesting stuff in the DLC. The one thing I wanted to talk about was legacy dungeons. The DLC has 3 legacy dungeons, but it includes multiple smaller legacy dungeon-esque locations like Stone Coffin Fisher, Castle Incest, and Fort of Reprimand is technically counted, but it feels more like a dungeon from the base game, so I don't really care about it. And last but not least, Midra's Manse. I'll go more into detail about Midra's Manse in a little bit. Right now, I want to talk about one of the most beautiful yet infamous areas, Cerulean Ghost. This area is probably one of the most beautiful video game areas I've ever seen. A lot of people say that this area is empty, and I kind of agree. It is a little empty, but there are a few bosses here, and 1 singular Shadow Tree fragment, and 0 revered Spirit Ashes. Wow. Now, there is a dungeon here, and that dungeon is Stone Coffin Fisher, and I actually like this dungeon a lot. It is probably one of the cooler looking dungeons, despite it just being an underground place, but I think that's what's neat about it, because it's not like other dungeons than the DLC, to be honest. And also, technically, this is not counted as a underground area, even though it is. It's like, it's more similar to the underground areas from the base game, but it doesn't have its own map, which is kind of strange, to be frank. Now, this area also feels a lot like a Dark Souls area. Like, I'm talking about one of those optional areas. Like, for example, like what Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls 3 has. Those games have probably the most optional areas in the franchise, especially Dark Souls 3. Actually, yeah, especially Dark Souls 3, because Dark Souls 2's optional areas weren't even optional. Most of them were required for some weird reason. But this area feels a lot like a Dark Souls 3 dungeon, though. Especially with the parts where you fall down, like in Ring City and whatnot. I like that. And now the boss of this area also feels like a Dark Souls boss, which is the Putrescent Knight. And I actually like this boss. I know I've been mentioning Dark Souls quite a bit, but I can't help but comparing this DLC to Dark Souls because it feels a lot like Dark Souls, even in length. But also, now I want to talk about the Abyss. To enter the Abyss, you must go to Lower Shadow Altus, which requires going to Shadowkeep. And by the way, going to Shadowkeep will break Miquella's Great Room, which is required to progress most quest lines and required to enter the Stone Coffin Fissure. And also, while I'm on topic of Shadowkeep, I can understand why people hate the Golden Hippo boss. This guy sucks, especially in Night Rain. Anyway, after beating the boss, you can proceed further into the dungeon, and there's a ladder here, and then another one, and then finally an illusory wall with a coffin, and then finally Lower Shadow Altus. And there's like 2 of these Wickermen here, and fudge these guys, dude. Also, there are more golden hippos, but they're much easier to kill than the boss. I don't know how that works. Also, they drop Shadow Tree fragments. So there's also 2 paths to enter the Abyss. Going down some coffins over here, or going to the Flyman or Manfly village past the Site of Grace, and then going down the hill. Now, here's my favorite Catacombs dungeon in the game. This one, I feel like can count in that Legacy Dungeon-esque like location thing, because this one is huge, man. Darklight Catacombs is very fudging dark and very huge. There's some switches that will light up the place, and there are also no Death Knights in this dungeon, but you can get the Death Knight armor, which looks awesome. This dungeon does have some annoying enemies like this wizard who can nearly insta-kill you, and more pogo imps. Fudge these guys. Going down, the second to last elevator will introduce you to this huge mother clucker. Why the fudge is this guy so huge? Anyway, this thing is one of the pea shooter, cannon mouth imps, except huge. And you can lower its podium by getting to the lever here, which will also light up the area as well. And then you can kill the big dude to get a great love word. And the boss in this dungeon is this dude named Jory the Inquisitor. And I like how this boss isn't even in the dungeon anymore. It's just literally the entrance to the Abyss. But this guy's pretty fudging annoying, to be honest. He just spams magic and summons random goons. I think he resists fire or something, because it took me a while to kill him. Also died once or twice, but after killing him, you can now enter the Abyssal Woods, which is the most infamous area in the game for being large and pretty freaking empty. There are like 3 Shadow Tree fragments here, and 6 of these annoying enemies known as aging untouchables. The game literally warns you about them when you enter the area with all these cryptic messages. When I first played the game, I was genuinely worried, especially since this literally felt like a horror game area. This area feels more like a horror game than Bloodborne would ever be. Anyway, also, if you can't tell, this area was touched by the 3 fingers, and that's why the animals here have the frenzied flame, and that's why the aging untouchables exist, because they are like priests of the frenzied flame or something like that. I don't know. They spread the bad word of the 3 fingers or something like that. Anyway, one of the best dungeons in the game is in this area, Midra's Manse. This place is very cool, but very small. It doesn't have many secrets, but it does have like 2 revered spirit ashes. So the Inquisitors in this dungeon burned all of Midra's books because what he was doing could literally unleash the end of the world. He was researching the Frenzied Flame and the 3 fingers, and because of his wife, I think. Lady Nanaya, she basically seduced him into researching that junk, therefore causing him to get in contact with the 3 fingers and nearly causing the end of the world. So then the Inquisitors put a barbed mace or whatever it is inside of him to prevent him from becoming a Lord of Frenzied Flame. The lore of this game is fudging insane, bro. And the boss of Midra's Manse is, of course, Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. This is probably my favorite boss in the game. He has the best soundtrack and the best fight experience, bro. Like, this boss is a 10 out of 10. Now, I want to talk about some of the other legacy dungeons that this DLC has to offer. So, let me talk about Bellerat first, which is the first legacy dungeon. It is definitely one of my favorites. This one kind of feels like Lothric from Dark Souls 3. Okay, it's nothing like Lothric. Now, I would say that Shadowkeep is more like Lothric, if I'm being honest. Anyway, Bellerat is basically part 1 of the final dungeon, but I'll get to that in a bit. I don't really have much to say about Bellerat, actually. I don't even know why I wanted to talk about Bellerat. Bellerat's cool and all, but there's nothing much to really talk about besides its like interesting aesthetic here. I do like the aesthetic here. They also have really annoying enemies in this dungeon. Like these dudes, I hate these dudes because they are like low-key annoying. Now, moving on to Shadowkeep. This is one of the best dungeons in the game. It's so fudging huge, dude. It has a church district that leads into the back section of the specimen storehouse. In the back section, literally, it leads into another area of the open world. This is like 3 dungeons in one. It's crazy. Also, the dungeon has 3 bosses. Erdtree, Avatar, Hog Rider, Commander Gaius, and then Mesmer. All 3 of these dudes are legendary bosses, man. The Specimen Storehouse reminds me a lot of the Grand Archives, and also, what was the other one? The other archive dungeon from Dark Souls. I forgot what it was called. Duke's Archives, yeah. It reminds me of those 2 dungeons. It feels very similar to those. I'll talk about the bosses in detail in a little bit, but first, I want to talk about the final dungeon of the DLC. And the final dungeon of the DLC is not as good as Shadowkeep, to be honest. And the final dungeon of the game is Inner Elim, or Bellerat Part 2. It's a great dungeon, a fun dungeon even, except for these guys. Fudge these guys. They are a more annoying version of the Horned Knight enemies from before. Inner Elim is pretty good aesthetically and one of my favorite dungeons in the game. And also, it is one of the only dungeons I've seen in a Souls game by From Software that has sand. One step closer to getting an actual desert in these Souls games. Maybe that will change with Duskbloods. Kind of hope so. Okay, now I will finally talk about the bosses. Legend bosses are probably the best part of the DLC. Bosses in this game get criticized for having long combos or ridiculous hitboxes. Some examples include Rolana in Commander Gaius, or Hog Rider as I call him. Personally, I don't really think that Rolana's combos are ridiculously long. Her attacks are pretty easy to dodge, especially since he's so similar to Pontiff from Dark Souls 3. Hog Rider is also not really that hard. His hitbox is probably the worst part, mostly on that rush attack, but you can really dodge all of his attacks pretty easily. So instead of just talking about those 2 bosses, I want to talk about bosses in general. Most of them are pretty fair, and there aren't any that feel really unfair. Some people would argue that the final boss is pretty unfair, but I'll get to that in a second. But if I were to pick a favorite boss in the DLC, it would obviously be Midra. Midra is peak boss design. Now, I'll say that Mesmer is pretty close. He has a pretty flashy boss with some easy to dodge moves, at least during the first phase, because during the second phase is where it gets more troublesome, mostly because of those goddamn snakes. Especially the attack where Mesmer summons a whole bunch of snakes. I hate that attack. And now, another favorite of mine is the Futurescent Knight. Once again, another boss with simple attacks. Sometimes simplicity is best, and for this boss, 100% yes. It can throw a boomerang or axe, cleaver, whatever it is, and it can also spin and send its horse after you. It also has this Frostfire attack, which can be easily dodged by jumping. Also, since it's weak to Holy, you can fudging shred its health bar with Sacred Blade. Oh yeah, I don't think I mentioned this, but you are required to beat this boss if you want to talk to Saint Train or finish the Oliur's quest line. So I've kind of delayed talking about this boss. Yeah, the final boss. So this DLC is about a couple of things. Chasing down Miquella, burning the Cerulean tree to enter Inner Elim. I kind of hate pronouncing that. And then kill Miquella. And Miquella has been doing some real devious trash, bro. When you talk to Ansbach, he learns about this in his quest line. Miquella used Moog's body to revive General Radahn, so then General Radahn would be his king consort. As in, he wants to marry his fudging half-brother. I wonder if George R.R. Martin had something to do with this. Oh yeah, Ansbach wants to kill Miquella for this, which is pretty base, to be honest. Mostly because his boss's body was literally disrespected by Miquella. Miquella literally used necromancy to revive another man using boss's body, which is crazy, dude. Poor Moog. Bro was mind controlled, and then his body was used for necromancy. Moog is honestly a victim, dude. So yeah, the final boss of the DLC is General Radahn. And again, this boss was pretty disappointing, to be frank. You get something awesome like Slave Knight Gale in Dark Souls 3, but then you get the Lothric Bros on Super Meth for this game, which is kind of lame. Like, to be honest, that kind of sounds funny. It sounds like it would be a very interesting boss, but no, I mean, okay, it's not a bad boss. It's just kind of disappointing. I like this boss, though. The first phase is fun. The second phase after the patch is pretty fun, depending on the build you use. And the music is some of the best that you will hear in a From Software game, 100%. People will go on about how lore-wise this boss makes no sense, but how would you know? You don't write the lore for this game. How would you know if it doesn't make no sense? I mean, yeah, it is kind of whack, but regardless, it probably made sense in Miyazaki's eyes. I mean, he's the guy who writes the lore. He's the lore master, so whatever he writes, we'll have to deal with, no matter if it's bad or good. People probably just say that because they wanted someone like Godwin as the final boss for the DLC, and I feel like lore-wise, that would make even less sense. Just like with Deltarune fans, if From Software fans could write these games, it would probably be a pile of donkey doo-doo. So, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is pretty peak, I can't even lie. I'll say that the price point of the DLC is a bit strange though. $40 for a DLC is kind of ridiculous, but for the amount of content you get from it, I don't think it's too bad. I think it would have been better if it was at least $25 or $30. Now, this DLC is definitely not without its faults. It got some problems, like some areas being empty, or just not really having that many good rewards, like cookbooks, for example. But I'll say the crafting junk in this DLC is more useful than crafting stuff in the base game, because like hefty fire pots and furnace pots are like overpowered, and no matter what, crafting is not the most useful thing in the game. Also, one big problem with the DLC is performance. While my game ran at a consistent 60 FPS on PC at least, this DLC really doesn't run well for certain PC builds. And also, this game does not run well at all on PS4, because goodness gracious, I hated playing this junk on PS4, because that's where I first played the DLC. Not only did it run poorly, it also loaded very slowly. And also, once again, I really don't think the bosses were unfair, especially Rellana, Gaius, or Promised Consort Radahn. Like, when the DLC first released, people acted like Gaius and Promised Consort were like the worst bosses ever. But when I played it, I had an easy time with both Gaius and Radahn. I guess it just really depends on who plays it. Now, if I were to rate Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, I would give it a clean 9.1 out of 10, which may seem too high to some people, but this is just my personal opinion. Well, that's about it for me, dog. I'm out of here.